The education system is going through a crisis, and teachers don't know what to do.
Teachers are speaking out, saying that iPad kids are poorly behaved and impossible to teach.
Teachers of all ages are quitting their job because of the behavior of Gen Alpha students.
The kids have no ability to be bored whatsoever. They live on their phones and they're just fed a constant stream of dopamine from the minute their eyes wake up in the morning until they go to sleep at night.
I'm gonna just say this. I teach 7th grade, they are still performing on the 4th grade level.
In a previous video, I went in depth on America's literacy crisis, specifically talking about the factors that have led to young children's reading scores dropping since 2012. And while I did touch on a few factors of formal education that influence these scores, I didn't really focus on the structure of the education system as a whole. Traditional teaching methods, the growing disconnect between teachers and students, and the overwhelming presence of technology have made the image of students quietly sitting in a classroom while a teacher lectures feel more outdated than ever. So let's go deeper into the current problems with America's schooling system, how it no longer sets up children for as much success, and what changes we could make to adapt to an era of rapid transformation. The current education system has remained largely unchanged for the last 200 years or so. When industrialization ramped up in the West, it created the need for universal schooling. Factories needed workers with basic literacy and numeracy skills for operating machinery and following instructions. But the push for universal education was also driven by things like reducing crime and promoting citizenship. At the time, the most optimal way to make sure the working population was receiving the teaching they needed in order to be prepared for their jobs was through rigid schedules, lecture-based instruction, and standardized testing. As the years went on, despite advancements in technology speeding up, this remained a relatively viable way to teach children. And along the way, some of those advancements got integrated into universal education. Stuff like TVs, computers, and digital smartboards were used to enhance the teaching methods, but weren't so detached from how those methods had worked the past 100+ years to the point where formal education was no longer effective or viable. But then, a few things happened. None of these factors alone can fully explain the decline of formal education, but together they've created the perfect storm that led to the current crisis we are in today. And those things are the unprecedented generational gap between teachers, adults, and Generation Alpha, the cost of living crisis, the devaluing of college degrees, artificial intelligence, and smartphones. And by the way, smartphones play a partial role in just about every other thing that I listed off. So let's start with the teachers. According to a survey of more than 1,300 K-12 schools across the nation conducted in the 2024-2025 school year, 82% of public schools had 2 or more teaching vacancies, and 74% of them had difficulty filling those positions. Why? Well, this survey found that the biggest reason was simply that too few candidates are applying for open positions. But I think it should be obvious by now that the reason that's the top reason is because of the awful pay. The Economic Policy Institute found that, on average, public school teachers earn 73.4 cents for every dollar relative to the earnings of similar professionals in 2023. That's roughly 27% less than comparable college graduates. So while the wages for most other college grads have gone up, the wages for teachers have remained largely stagnant since the mid-1990s. Knowing this, it's easy to see why we're hearing the kinds of stories teachers are sharing about Gen Alpha students, like the ones I mentioned at the start of the video. Put very bluntly, people are much more willing to put up with bullshit, and in this case, kids' bullshit, if they're getting paid fairly for it. But seeing as the pay is so awful, the ones that did decide to pursue a degree in education that are getting paid pennies for it now have to put up with what is allegedly the most ill-tempered and self-centered generation there is. We'll expand upon that observation in a second, but first I want to talk about today's sponsor, David Protein. I find it pretty difficult to stay in a caloric deficit while still trying to maintain or build muscle. And as someone who takes their fitness seriously, this is a big problem for me. I could just eat pounds of beef or chicken, but when I eat those, I'm usually having a full meal, and the calories in that meal can add up quickly. But David allows me to get rid of this problem. They have the highest protein to calorie ratio on the market. It's 150 calories and 28 grams of protein, which is absolutely unheard of in a protein bar. With those macros, I expected it to taste like pure protein chalk, but the blueberry pie one is actually really tasty and masks the taste of protein well. And they just came out with a new cinnamon roll flavor, which I destroyed faster than I would have liked to. If you're someone who's trying to lose weight and keep the calories down, but keep the protein up simultaneously, and you just want a quick, easy way to get in almost 30 grams of protein, should definitely check out David. You can get a whole carton entirely for free when you order 4 or more by using my link, which is in the description, or scanning the QR code that you see on screen right now. So go try it out. Let's keep the motherfucking gains. In a rare study comparing generational differences, the researchers identified characteristics of Generation Alpha from the perspective of preschool teachers. They found Generation Alpha to exhibit behaviors such as being more curious, free from any rules, being more ill-tempered, more mobile, and more self-centered than Generation Z. Moreover, they also had high self-esteem, and they were more emotional and more conscious. A caveat I'd like to make with this study is that they're just taking the perspective of a small sample of teachers and comparing them to their Gen Z students. So it would be wrong to generalize that all Generation Alpha kids have these traits more than Generation Z kids do. Still, what I think this study highlights is exactly what I wanted to get into next: the increasing generational gap. To really understand how big this gap is, let's compare the disconnect between today's teachers and Gen Alpha to a previous generational gap, when Gen X was in middle or high school around 1977 to 1998. Back then, the older teachers were mostly from the silent generation, shaped by World War II and post-war conservatism, while the younger ones were boomers, shaped by the Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam War, and the counterculture era. Yes, they had different worldviews, but despite that, Gen Xers and boomers still grew up in a world that operated on the same basic rules. The way kids played, the way they socialized after school, the way teachers taught, it was all pretty consistent. Now let's contrast that with today. Gen Alpha is being taught by millennials and younger Gen Xers, people who didn't grow up with smartphones, social media, or instant access to AI-powered information. And meanwhile, Gen Alpha has never known a world without those things. Their entire childhood has been mediated by screens designed to grab their attention, deliver instant feedback, and never let them feel bored. We didn't just shift culture, we shifted the entire architecture of childhood. What took a century to evolve before now has flipped upside down completely in less than a decade. From the way they talk to each other, to how quickly they receive information, to the pandemic which stunted their maturity, to the endless amount of entertainment they have access to, Gen Alpha is the first generation that has grown up in a world almost completely foreign to any other generation before it. So when the teachers complain about their kids not focusing on their schoolwork, or not paying attention, or being rude, it's not just, oh, there's always going to be some rambunctious, rebellious kids, and there's going to be some bad apples in every class. It's these kids are now spending 7 hours a day every weekday in an incompatible, outdated system with them that we have been teaching kids to learn for the past 2 centuries. And it's neither the kids nor the teacher's fault. This is where someone might say, oh, well, it's the parents' responsibility. You know, the parents have to instill the importance of formal education and doing well in school to see future success early on in their childhood and restrict their kids from using stimulating devices as much as possible. And while that is true to some extent, I would argue that there's only so much that a parent can do to shelter their child from digital devices and the online world. Yes, parents should do a better job ensuring their child spends enough time playing with other children and actually engaging with physical reality, but these devices are now so intertwined with our lifestyles that we depend on them to stay up to date and not fall behind in this new, ever-evolving digital world. That's not me giving parents an excuse to be shitty parents, it's just the reality of what we're facing right now. And I know a lot of you might have rolled your eyes when I said millennials didn't grow up with social media and smartphones. Well, yeah, they kind of did, but they grew up in a time where social media wasn't so exploitative, abrasive, and mentally damaging. So they're still trying to catch up and learn about the damages that too much of this stuff can have on children and how to properly limit it. It's an extremely fresh field of research when we compare it to the entire timeline of the Industrial Revolution, because Gen Alpha is the first generation to grow up entirely in the 2020s era digital environment, with smartphones and social media embedded in daily life from birth. Now let's talk about one of the other ways that the digital environment has indirectly changed the world forever that is tied to the education crisis, the cost of living crisis, and the devaluing of college degrees. These These are related enough that I feel like lumping them together just makes sense. When we think about how to stop formal education from declining, we often tend to focus on what I've been talking about, such as improving the system for both teachers and students. That's absolutely important, but without a proper incentive to actually study and learn, that still probably won't be enough. And right now, those incentives feel drier than ever. I don't need to beat a dead drum about how hard it is to afford the things that make life feel like it's actually moving forward, but let me beat a dead drum. Listen, Gen Alpha is not stupid, at least in the sense that they don't know what's going on in the world and what their potential future might look like. They are seeing loads of influencers talk about wages stagnating and house prices increasing and how AI is going to replace millions of jobs soon. With a narrative like that being fed to them, what incentive do they have to actually pay attention and do well in school? If what they're being taught isn't actually preparing them for the workforce and will barely help them get a job, what reason do they have to discipline themselves? Why would they listen to a teacher? Why would they behave? And so this too creates a cycle tied to the decline of teaching as a profession. Not only are teachers getting paid trash and they feel like they can't relate to students more than ever, but even if they do try to enforce rules and get students in trouble, the students simply don't care. Because why does it matter anyways?
And they have a level of apathy that I've never seen before in my whole career. Punishments don't work because they don't care about them. They don't care about grades. They don't care about college. It's like you are interacting with them briefly in between hits of the internet.
I get it, kids like this have always existed, but when a brighter future feels increasingly out of reach, then naturally more kids like this are going to spawn out of that system. And that's before I've even mentioned the cost of pursuing college itself. The average cost of public higher education adjusted for inflation has soared, while the job market has simultaneously gotten harder and harder for new grads. Numbers from the first quarter of 2025 from the New York Federal Reserve show that the unemployment rate for recent college graduates reached 5.8%, up from 4.8% in January. Companies have also pulled back on hiring. Last fall, employers expected to increase college graduate hiring by 7.3%, according to a survey led by the National Association of Colleges and Employers. Now they're projecting just a 0.6% increase, with about 11% of companies planning to hire fewer new grads than before. The reasons for this are related to the reasons I outlined in my Why Young Men Aren't Going to College video, mainly that most employers now prioritize candidates' skills and experience over their degrees. To expect Gen Alpha, a generation that grew up in a fast-paced, information-rich digital environment, to sit in a classroom for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, just to struggle to get a degree and then struggle to find a job because their degree isn't actually worth as much anymore, is insanity when you frame things that way. And that's the general feeling I get from Gen Alpha, especially since they are simultaneously fed the narrative that you can make money online in so many more different ways now, ways that aren't taught in school at all. And that leads me to the final boss of disrupting education: artificial intelligence. If there wasn't a big enough incentive to pay attention and learn in class before, well, you bet your ass there's virtually none now. It almost seems dumb to spend a long time talking about AI's impact on education, because compared to everything else we've gone over, it's so blatantly obvious what the consequences will be. But maybe I'll spend an entire video talking about it in the future. If you want to see that, let me know in the comments. We've got kids using AI to do their assignments for them, cheat on their tests for them, summarize the books they're supposed to be reading, and then writing essays based on those summaries for them, not actually learning much of anything in the process, thus stunting their ability to think critically, develop discipline, and focus. And you have to blame part of that on how the current education system teaches students and under-rewards students for learning, because again, there simply just isn't enough of an incentive to not cheat. So now that we understand what I believe to be the biggest reasons for the decline of formal education as a whole, the question then becomes, like always, what can we do? Well, in regards of how to teach specifically, I think it comes down to answering these 4 questions. How is Gen Alpha engaging with the world around them? How is that shaping their values and worldview? How can we naturally incorporate education into the things that already capture Gen Alpha's attention or create similar experiences that are educational by design? And how can we connect what students are learning to the real-world skills they'll need for their future jobs while still emphasizing the importance of core subjects like math and reading, no matter the career path? We already have a pretty clear picture of the answer to that first question, so let's move on to the next three. As far as values and worldview, I think Gen Alpha are developing what we could call algorithmic values, and that sounds a lot more dystopian than it actually is when I'll go on to explain it. What I mean by algorithmic values are expectations shaped by platforms that reward perceived authenticity, viral content, and instant feedback. Here's the wild part. Gen Alphas spend an average of 2 hours per day on TikTok, yet only 5% rank social media as most important in their lives. This reveals a generation that's digitally native but surprisingly discerning. They expect personalization, immediate relevance, and content that adapts to their interests. Most importantly, they've grown up expecting information to be interactive, quick, and customizable, not static and one-size-fits-all. They value transparency over perfection, and they want to see direct connections between what they're learning and its real-world application.
They are so aware of their power and what they want and what they don't want, and they are not afraid to share it.
So next question, how can we naturally incorporate education into what already captures Gen Alpha's attention? Well, I think the best ways we could do this is through gamification and personalized learning experiences. When I say gamification, I'm referring to the process of applying game design and mechanics to non-game contexts to enhance engagement and motivation. Considering the fact that most Gen Alphas play video games daily, this could be a great way to take the things they love about video games and the stimulation of it and apply that to learning. For instance, one study found that college students in a gamified cell biology class outperformed those in a traditional lecture-based class by 40%. Instead of just passively listening and regurgitating information, students earned points for completing challenges, unlocked new levels by mastering concepts, and collaborated in teams to solve simulated biological problems. The game mechanics kept them engaged, but the real power was in how those mechanics reinforced learning, making complex material feel active, personal, and rewarding. As for personalized learning, I think this makes more sense when we explain it through the last question that we need to answer. How can we connect what students are learning to the real-world skills they'll need for their future jobs while still emphasizing math and reading? I believe this requires us to fundamentally restructure middle and high school to mirror college choice while still maintaining those essential foundations. It's estimated that 2/3 of Gen Alpha will work in jobs that don't even exist today. Knowing this, aligning a school's curriculum with our new and upcoming world is essential if we want these kids to actually be prepared, have more job opportunities, and genuinely be excited about learning and entering the workforce. That means not only updating what we teach, but also giving kids more of a say in what learning path they choose to go down so they're more motivated and passionate about the work they're doing. Instead of forcing all students through identical curricula, imagine student-selected subjects, like students choosing from science, history, arts, technology, and career-focused options. Imagine choice-based reading, where students select books within genre requirements or thematic units with teacher guidance. And imagine flexible math pathways, where students learn essential mathematical concepts through applications that align with their interests, like game design, data analysis, financial planning, or engineering. For example, what if we showed students how statistical analysis applies to being an aspiring social media creator, or teaching geometric principles to those interested in game design, or algebraic concepts for future entrepreneurs calculating business models? When you tie the learning concepts into the worlds that they're already occupying and are interested in, that's when kids start to see more of a purpose in their education and become motivated to work hard. And of course, I didn't forget about the teachers. Both the implementation of the features I described just now and the increase in teacher wages would almost definitely require more school funding. States have cut school funding deeply since the Great Recession, and in many states, those cuts haven't been fully reversed. If you or anyone you know knows how to start reversing this, please get them into some sort of local government office, or if you have any other suggestions, leave them in the comments. But if school funding itself doesn't increase, teachers still need to have their wages updated to meet modern standards. Otherwise, just like kids learning in the current education system, there's not gonna be enough of an incentive to become a teacher. And lastly, make college degrees worth something again. That means lowering the cost of public education and realigning college curricula as well to teach students relevant modern skills, adaptability, and flexibility, which is what a lot of employers are now looking for. So yeah, there's no single fix here. It's not just about making school more fun or banning phones or increasing teacher wages. It's about realizing that our current system is built for a world that doesn't exist anymore. And the longer we keep trying to force kids into this system, the more disengaged, frustrated, and hopeless they'll become. We have the tools, the research, and the understanding to start building something better. But whether we actually do that or just keep patching up the same broken structure depends on how seriously the message in this video is taken by the people who have the power to do something about it. It's clear that critical thinking is in a bit of a crisis now too, partly because of education, but partly because the online world is just so emotionally charged, full of rage baiting, full of misinformation, and full of people disagreeing and debating with each other in bad faith. In this world of increasing mistrust, it's going to become all the more important to have the skills to critically think, to emotionally regulate yourself, and to learn how to discern what is true and what isn't. The problem is there's not really any tools out there right now that actually teach you how to develop those critical thinking skills. And that is why for the past year, I've been working on creating a critical thinking masterclass, a 16-video curriculum designed to help you sharpen your reasoning, spot manipulative rhetoric, and navigate emotionally charged conversations, both online and in real life. I plan on completing the masterclass within the next couple months, so if you're interested, you can join the waitlist by going to cole-hastings.com/critical thinking. It's one of the first links in the description as well, and you will get notified when it drops. Would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you haven't seen my literacy crisis video yet, you should watch it if you enjoyed this video. And I'm leaving now. Check out that video, binge my videos so I can make more money. Cool. Bye.